Hello, welcome to the Brain Scrub, a somewhat improvised approach to mental health. My name is Glenn Sollers, and thanks for tuning in today. And I am so honored to have my buddy here, Jason Duncan, who I met a few years ago, and he's been an outstanding influence in my life. He's young-spirited. Also, he's younger than me, and he knows a lot about money. When I think about the community I live in, I would have to say Jason has the most beautiful home with the most spectacular view. And I've always been very curious about how he achieved that. And long ago, we were having a conversation about what he achieved. And he was saying, one thing that I've always wanted to do is educate folks out there how to make it in terms of from a money perspective, because money has a lot to do with mental health, how we feel, but money and how we deal with money also has a lot to do with what we learned about money. So, Jason, without further ado, if you just want to give yourself a bit of an introduction so our audience knows a bit more about you.
Jason Duncan, and as Glenn said, we live in this wonderful community of the News Bay. Are we supposed to say that on air?
Yeah, that's fine. I don't think I've ever said that before.
I guess, one of the things that I think Glenn is probably impressed about is the fact that I'm 46 and have been retired for the last 3 to 4 years, I guess it is. There's a number of kind of simple strategies and, of course, luck that played into that. Oh, and, not having kids and having a partner, my wife, Sharon, who has a lot of the same kind of financial philosophies and did some of the same things that I've done over my life when she was younger as well. So, we've been extremely lucky and taken advantage of good fortune, but we've also kind of created this financial independence that has allowed us to live in this wonderful community.
So I'm a bit older than Jason, and I've always been envious of him in many respects, how he's achieved this. And what I'm hoping to talk about today is how does one get to where Jason is? And the first thing I want to talk about, Jason, for you is how did you grow up with money? Like, what did you learn at a young age? Because I think our history has a lot to do with how we view money as an adult, or some of our habits, or what it is we do. So, for example, I grew up with a father who was very stingy. Every night he was counting his money. He was self-employed. He always said to me, Glenn, pay off your mortgage, pay off your mortgage, pay off your mortgage. He showed me all the high interest rates. So I've had a real focus on paying off my debt, paying off my mortgages. In fact, I hate borrowing money from people. I just do not like it. I always pay everything off as quick as possible. But that's the one value he left with me. But there wasn't much else around investing in property or things like that. So I'm curious to know a bit more about how you grew up with money or what you learned.
Sure. So I was lucky enough to have a father who was an accountant. So I learned a lot about money from him. And one of the big things was saving, right? Saving your money, investing it, and kind of setting yourself up for the future. Of course, I think we all grew up in a time of extremely high interest rates, and paying off debt is part of that. But I think the bigger and most important part, which we'll talk about today, is really around saving and how you leverage those savings for the future.
How old were you when you started saving money, if you don't mind me asking?
Since I can remember, when I was getting an allowance, I would try to save as much of that as I could and keep it towards putting it in a bank account or whatever the case was. But I wasn't the one spending the money. Like a lot of people I grew up with, my friends, would take their allowance and blow it on chocolate bars and candy. Whereas, I had room for that stuff. I wouldn't say being stingy is part of it. Got to enjoy things too and enjoy life. But it's about putting the money away at the beginning so that it's there in the future. So.
Yeah, I never made any money off my Fun Dip candy,
Exactly.
Nor the ET cards I bought or those hockey cards. Yeah, I never made any money off those things.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that my dad did for my family was taking, I think it was the family savings allowance or grant that the government was giving, and instead of spending that, a lot of these kids were getting new jeans out of that or new whatever. My dad was actually putting that away for us. So he was saving that money up so that it would go towards our future, maybe getting a house or a university or something like that. So, he actually started that process for us, and I'll talk about how powerful that could be later on when we talk about some of the things I wanted to talk about.
Well, let's talk about that right now.
Wow. Okay. Going backwards, it's really about the magic of compound interest, right? And how powerful that can be, and really setting yourself up for the future. As I kind of mentioned, I kind of wrote down some numbers, but essentially, if you save money between the time you're 18 and 29, that money will be worth more when you're 65 than the money you save from 30 to 65. So if you put, say, $1,000 away for each year, which isn't really very much, if you did that from the time you were 18 to 29, and it's, assume you got an 8% interest rate, you would have $320,000 saved out of that by the time you're 65. If you saved $1,000 from the time you're 30 to 65, you would have, I think it's $120,000 or something like that. So that's just a very powerful way to accumulate savings. Essentially, it's a get rich slow scheme, right? It's not very sexy. It's not very exciting. But if you put away money over time, and, again, I'll talk about some other kind of concepts that go along with that. I think the first thing I wanted to talk about from a past self and some of the mistakes we've made in the past, you touched on debt. There's one, I think debt can be great, right? I believe, you can leverage debt to future savings. So that's one of the great things about real estate is you're essentially leveraging down payment of, say, $100,000. You buy, $1 million place. Now, when that grows, your investment of $100,000 potentially could grow to 1.2 million, 1.5, $2 million. And yeah, you have to pay off the debt and finance that, but that can be a huge, powerful tool towards getting wealthy. But one of the most important things I think that probably causes a lot of people stress is credit cards and credit card debt, right? Credit cards are essentially loan sharking, right?
Tell me a bit more about that.
I mean, if you, it's so easy. Credit cards are great tools, right? They allow you to go on vacation. Online shopping wouldn't exist without credit cards. They actually protect you against potentially getting scammed or getting, if you make a bad purchase or something like that, you can sometimes get your money back from the credit card company if somebody ripped you off or whatever the case is. They even provide medical insurance and travel insurance and stuff like that. So they can be a great tool, but it's just so easy to kind of slap down your credit card and rack up huge monthly expenses. And oops, if you don't pay that off at the end of the month, now you're paying 20, 30% interest on that money month after month. So you can really spiral out of control in terms of, that kind of debt load. So I think that's going to cause people huge stress in their lives, right? If you're not managing those kind of basic things. So really it's important if you're using a credit card, just make sure you pay it off. And if you can't control your spending on a credit card, maybe you should try to use a debit card or something else. But, also if you have credit card debt racked up, it's important to try to consolidate that into a lower interest loan, right? And kind of get that under control, because you don't want to continue to pay that monthly 19, 20, 30% accrued interest that just keeps building and building. And that mountain of debt comes down on you, you're just not going to be able to afford to ever pay it off, right? And that's really how the credit card companies make their money, is by kind of preying on that. So I think that's, taking care of past mistakes. That's the important thing, is really just managing and controlling that credit card.
And I think the thing is, and banks are quite clever. Of course, they're in it to make money. Profit's their friend, and they're always making tons of profit.
Absolutely.
And the whole thing on your credit card statement, you get it and it says your minimum payment due is $11 or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
But people don't realize, I don't think, that you get charged interest on the full amount. So let's say your bill is $5,000. You decide to pay off $1,000. You're actually being charged interest on the full $5,000.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But a lot of people don't know that.
Yeah.
So it's important. that's trying to make it look easy that, yeah, you don't have to worry about it. But yeah, the amount of interest, the 20% or whatever it is, that definitely adds up.
Absolutely. So I think that could be a huge stress for people. And I know a lot of people that are well-to-do and yet they're racking up credit card debt in the background, and people don't necessarily realize that, how damaging that can be to your financial situation. So that's a huge lesson about fixing your past mistakes. Another lesson, which, I talked about.
Well, can I just ask one more question about this?
Sure.
So when you were younger,
yeah,
did you pay everything with cash or did you put it on credit card? What was your habit? Because I know there's some people out there that carry cash around with them.
Yeah.
Because you can see it. You can see, okay, well, I have this much money, therefore I can spend that money. Where if you have a credit card, you don't see necessarily how much you're spending. It's just like, oh, no worries, I'll just tap it here, I'll tap it there.
Yeah.
And it's those small purchases that really add up. My wife and I always have talks about this.
Absolutely.
It's like, oh yeah, I got it on sale, or I got this. And I do the same thing. I spend money frivolously sometimes. However, if you have that
and then
cash
you
in your
look
pocket,
and go, whoops, my credit card is $5,000. How did my credit card bill get to be $5,000 this month?
Yeah, how is it that I don't have any debt really, and I still have these large credit card bills every month? And yeah,
so I think I got my first credit card when I kind of started working. Right, I was making an income, but I always made sure to pay it off, and I was, again, looking at my credit card bill to make sure that I was charged correctly. And not just forgetting about it. I would look at that on a regular basis, and it's so easy to do that online nowadays, right? You just, back then, I guess, you were looking at your statement on a monthly basis, but now you get an alert on your phone every time you purchase something, or your wife purchases something. So
how do I set that up?
So you can make sure that you're not getting overcharged or that you have fraudulent charges. That's important too. Keeping track of that, it's easy to, again, just kind of go without thinking, and all of a sudden, oops. But that's where the next lesson I think comes in too, is it's never too late to start saving, right? If you're not saving any money on a monthly basis, then that's when I think the credit card can really build up too. Those things kind of go hand in hand, right? If you have a cushion of money that you've saved over the past, then you can avoid, if you have a big month, I purchased a $10,000 mountain bike.
Who would do that?
You can dip into your savings. You don't want to leave that on your credit card balance, right? You want to make sure that you've got money in the bank that you can cover those expenses if you do splurge one month. And restaurants and stuff like that add up quick. In Vancouver, we used to go out, a lot more than we do now, right? And those $50, $100, now it's like $200 tabs start to really kind of get out of control if you're not careful. So yeah, looking at your credit card. And the other thing is, carrying cash is, that may be great for certain situations, but a credit card also, if you are paying it month after month, guess what it does? It builds up a great credit score. So now that gives you the ability to get a mortgage and to get better financing on a vehicle or whatever. So it's actually important to have a credit card and use it responsibly, because what's as bad as bad credit, no credit, right? So if you don't get that credit card when you're young and kind of learn how to use it responsibly, it's not going to help you in the future. That's for sure.
Yes, and I had a question. It just fleeted away, Jason. We'll just keep on going.
Yeah, and so again, savings is a big part of kind of what I want to really hit home on today. But another thing that I think people often make mistakes on, and again, this is like your past self making a mistake, is you get this job at a company, and what do? They usually give you free money, right? They'll give you say a 5% match on a retirement savings plan, or maybe if you got a really good company, they're giving you a stock purchase plan or profit sharing or something like that. And typically those types of plans always come with a matching program. They're not going to give you that money unless you put the money in first. So and this also ties into kind of the next point about the future self. But if you're working for a company that's giving you free money, take advantage of it, because otherwise you're just going to lose that money and get further behind every month. That's going to set you up for the future, right? And So that's an important thing that I think a lot of people make the mistake of, is they don't take advantage of what their company is giving you. And not everyone, obviously, if you're self-employed or something like that, you don't get the luxury of those kind of programs. But if you do work for some sort of a company, they generally offer some type of retirement savings or program that, you know, you can benefit from. And so it's important to take advantage of that if it's given to you.
Yeah, and on that note, I'm just thinking a bit about me. Like, first, now I remember what I was going to ask you earlier, and that was, I've always invested money, but I started way too late, and I didn't pay a lot of attention to how terrible my investor was.
Right.
And in fact, I don't think I made any money over 15 years, and I just thought that was the way it was. And later on, I was talking to people, and they said, well, you have to keep an eye on that. And I'm not analytical that way. I put that aside, trusting the person that I was paying to invest my money. That's number one. So that's one thing that I learned, is always question your investor.
Yeah.
Because they work for you, and if it's not working, and then unfortunately, my wife and I ran into the same situation with a trusted friend that they had, same sort of thing. They didn't have our best interests in mind. At least that's what we felt, and we weren't making money. And again, people said, well, you should be making 10% a year on your investments. And I'm like, really? But on that note, I am now having to, because I want to retire by the time I'm 60, 65, I'm having to put X number of dollars away. And to your point, if you don't see the money in your bank account, you're not going to spend it. Yeah. So whenever I get a lump sum of money, I just throw it right into my RSP.
Yeah.
I don't see it. It's like I don't have it, which is perfect for me right now. And I wish I would have had that same mentality when I was younger.
Yeah. And so, you know, this is an interesting topic, because the financial industry is this billions and billions of dollars, and there's all these people that are promising this and that. If you really sit back and think about how the stock market works, it's rigged. And it's rigged that, you know, the indexes achieve about 10% per year, right? If you were just to buy the S&P 500, which is, you know, one of the main indexes in the United States, the average annual return is over 10% a year. Since 1927 or whenever it started, right? So we should be able to achieve that. And there's an easy way to potentially do that, right? Is to buy what they call ETF funds, which are exchange traded funds that just essentially mirror the index. They have lower fees. You know, if you're paying a broker or a financial advisor, you know, they have these high fees, and they put you in a mutual fund that's supposedly going to make all this money for you. And that has, you know, a fee on it. So you're paying fees on top of fees to have, you know, essentially, I hate to say it, a salesperson, you know, managing your money for you, right? Whereas if you just follow the index, you're almost guaranteed to make that 8 to 10% a year, right? Because And when I say it's rigged, you know, I was doing some research, and this was part of the point I wanted to make too about the markets. If you look at the Dow Jones Industrial Average, which is, you know, similar to the S&P, it's one of the main stock market indexes, and it tracks the 30 companies, 30 of the biggest companies in the United States, right? So I think it was 1927 when that expanded to 30 stocks, and Bethlehem Steel was added to the stock market, or the index. And Bethlehem Steel stayed on the market until 1997. Does anybody know anything about Bethlehem Steel? No. And in the 80s, Kodak was a high flyer on the market, right? And that was removed, and then Microsoft was added to the market. And now companies like Amazon and Apple are on the market. So they actually remove the Kodaks and the Bethlehem Steels, and even Chevron and Texaco, you know, were major components of the stock market or the indexes in the past, and those companies get replaced over time. So if you had actually bought, you know, in 1950, let's say you bought the 30 companies that make up the index, you think, oh great, I'm going to make my, you know, 8 to 10% a year by doing that. Well, guess what? You'd be bankrupt, right? You would lose all that money because those stocks no longer exist. But if you actually just bought the index fund, you're mirroring the economy as it evolves and changes, and the companies come and go, and you're taking advantage of the next high flyer as it grows into this behemoth stock and kind of lives through its corporate lifespan, right? So it's, it's an interesting topic that people don't think about or realize. And yet, and again, there's this whole industry built around, how do I make people more money than the stock market? And they always say that that's almost impossible for a money manager to continually outperform the stock market. Sometimes they can for a few years or whatever the case is, but generally speaking, over time, they're never gonna beat the market, right? So
I never knew that. So you're saying go into an ETF.
Well,
versus...
I'm not saying that, but I'm saying that if you want to take the stress out of doing money management, here's kind of, that's kind of backwards, because what I wanted to say about your future self was pay yourself first, right? Which we've talked about. So if you're making $5,000 a month or $5,000 a week or whatever it is, you should be putting at least 10% of that money away immediately, right? So if you put 10% away towards your retirement, and that doesn't necessarily include you're saving for a car, you're saving for a down payment. Really, that's 10% towards retirement. If you put that away, which you could have that automatically deposited in, have your bank automatically take that and deposit it into a TFSA, let's say, and then inside your TFSA, if you bought a index fund, you really can't go wrong, right? And the other part of this, so paying yourself first. And then even buying the index, sure, you could put $10,000 in the index on, January 1st, 2022. That's probably worth $7,000 now, right? Because the market tanked last year. I mean, we had tremendous growth over the last few years, and last year was a bad year for the market. So if you put a big lump sum of money into the market, you're taking a risk, because the risk is the market could crash, and now that money is worth a lot less. But instead... And really, the TFSA is tax-free savings account here in Canada is such a powerful tool, because you put away, now it's $6,500 a year, right? That's, if you do that from the time you're 18 to 65, you're going to have like $8 million, right? So if that's all you really need to do is just put your TFSA money away. For you, you've got to make up for lost time, so you're going to have to save a lot more, and you have a larger income. So using an RSP and things like that are, important, because that reduces your tax bill at a higher income, and all those sorts of things. But so if you took let's say, you put $200 biweekly into a TFSA, that's going to equal, say, close to $5,000, maybe a little more than $5,000 a year. But if every 2 weeks you're putting that $200 in and buying an ETF, if the market goes up to 10,000, now you're buying $200 at 10,000. But if the market goes down to 7,000, now you're buying, instead of getting 10,000, you're getting 13,000 shares or whatever that's not the right 100. Instead of getting 100 shares, now you're getting 130 shares. So you're actually, when the market dips, it's beneficial, because you're actually getting more of the shares because you're continuing to just invest. So if you continue to dollar cost average into the market over, that 10-year period from the time you're 18 to 29, 11 or 12 years, whatever it is, you're almost guaranteed, you can't really lose money doing that, unless the market, say, goes to zero, which I think we have bigger problems to worry about if that happened. And another example of this is my nephew, Sammy, and Zach were here during COVID, and we were lucky enough to have them doing online university. And Sammy was a huge proponent of Bitcoin. And so we had lots of discussions about Bitcoin, and I always told him how risky it was, and it's very volatile and stuff like that. And we kind of said, well, the best way to probably put your money into Bitcoin is to dollar cost average into it over time, right? Because then you can kind of put a little bit in. If it goes higher, you're getting less Bitcoin, but you're still putting that money in. And as it grows, you're still making money. So Sammy emailed me the other day and told me that if you had dollar cost averaged in to Bitcoin, starting when it was at its high of $69,000 US to right now, which it's now sitting at, I think, 28,000, you would have made 11% on your money. As the Bitcoin dropped in value by like 80%, you actually still would have made money on your Bitcoin because the dropped and dropped and dropped, went down to a low. When it's at its low, you're getting a lot more Bitcoin than when it was at 69K. And now that it's come up a little bit, now all of a sudden you're making a huge profit because the Bitcoin has kind of grown in value and you've collected and continue to accumulate it as it, throughout this whole period of time. So you actually kind of average into it and it becomes kind of automatic in terms of how you invest and what your returns are. So, those are kind of very stress-free ways to invest, right? Because you're not really thinking about it. If you're doing it automatically into your TFSA, and it should continue to grow with the market. It's not going to be linear, obviously. The market goes up and down, but over time, historically over the last 90 years, the market has grown at 10%. So if we could even get 8%, like I said, the magic of the compounding interest is going to turn that into huge dollar values in the long term, right? And the other point is, like, if you're a parent, what if you were to put some money away for your kids when they're born, right? If you put $1,000 away for your kid from the time they're 1 until 18 and left that sitting there, and again achieve that 8 to 10%, that money could be worth anywhere from like 1.5 to $6.6 million. So at 10%, it's huge, and the numbers get stupid when you increase the percentage return. I think 5%, if you can achieve 5%, that's where 5%, the numbers work. At 4% or less, that, it starts to break down, and that's not necessarily the case anymore, where the savings at a young age adds up to more than the, the rest of your life. But again, if you just follow the market averages, there's no reason you can't achieve that. But if you were to achieve 25% return on your $5,000 investment from, again, so you invested, I think it's $65,000 from the time you're 18 to 29. If you got 25% interest, guess how much that would be worth at 65? Just guess.
So it was initial investment of how much again?
Like, I think it's 65,000.
65,000
between 18 and
I would
29,
say,
and so you've
a 25% return.
Yeah, annually.
I'm going to pull a number out of thin air, Jason. 15 million?
$1 billion.
$1 billion.
So it gets like, and obviously 25% isn't that realistic, but if you were to start a company, let's say, and grow your company, then maybe that's not unachievable, right? And that's, we see all these billionaire, that have companies and stuff like that. Well, they did it in a lot less time, but, if you were able to grow a company at 25% a year, you'd have $1 billion company in 30 years, right? So the numbers are kind of crazy when you look at them that way, right? And
definitely,
it's kind of just takes the stress out of financial planning and management. And that's one of the things I always say. Like, I'll sing to any 18-year-old that'll listen to me about getting your TFSA and maxing that out over the next 12 years, right? When you're through, and maybe it's tough to do because you've got in your 20s, it's hard to save money because you've got so many pressures, and you're going to school and you're trying to buy a house potentially or start a family, and oftentimes that's in your 30s these days. But it's not easy to save when you're that age. I think if it was, we'd all be wealthy, right? But if you think of it that way, it's not that difficult for a kid to put $200 away every 2 weeks, right? If you put $200 away every 2 weeks into your TFSA, that's all you really need to save for the rest of your life if you can achieve that 8 to 10%.
So what would you say to those younger than us that feel that it's unaffordable here for sure in British Columbia for many people, that homes are unaffordable, that you're looking at a minimum of $500,000, let's say, for a condo, a small condo, where they feel, I don't want to be like my parents. I don't want to have to pay everything off, save everything, and I want to have work-life balance. Therefore, I'm going to spend my money because I'll never be able to afford a house anyway, what would you say to the
Well,
youth
your
of today?
a house is just one component of it, right?
Yeah.
So I just, like I said, as long as you max out your TFSA, and then later on, you want to probably take advantage of RSPs. Owning a house maybe isn't necessarily that important, right? Maybe renting is fine. Owning a house isn't that easy either, right? You've got a lot of responsibility, expenses. I mean, if you're young and you get a couple of roommates, maybe it's, a $3,000 or $4,000 a month place starts to become more manageable, right? Now, I'm not saying you shouldn't be buying real estate, and I think maybe we'll see what happens in the next few years as interest rates have now gone up a lot, and inflation's, of course, the enemy of, you can make 1.5 million, but if inflation eats that away, then that 1.5 isn't worth that much, right?
Yes.
But, I think when you're young, everything looks so big and impossible, but as you get older, you start to accumulate savings and things become more manageable. So really, I said saving a minimum of 10%. If you're I think really you need to save more like 20 or 30% of your paycheck at a young age, right? And you don't have the same expenses as somebody who's got children or got mortgages, and at some point you're going to have those kind of expenses. But when you're young, yeah, you're maybe not making as much. You have some other pressures in life, but you also have the ability to kind of sock away money. It's kind of like your education, right? You're building yourself up for the future. If you do the same thing with money, then you're kind of golden. And for young men, particularly, and young women, it doesn't have to be men, but going to university, is that really the be all and end all for an 18-year-old? Maybe not, right? Because you're kind of hurting yourself in the future because you're not making any money. You're racking up debt. You're ending up with potentially not even a huge income at the end of that. Whereas if you're getting into, say, a trade, start off making $40,000 or $50,000 a year these days as a first-year apprentice, you get your apprenticeship. After 4 years, you've got something just as valuable as a university degree, right? You've got your Red Seal ticket, and you're making $80,000 or $100,000. And if you've saved up your TFSA and now you're starting to put money in your RSP, boy, oh boy, you could be in a really good place. And once you hit your 30s and 40s and 50s, right?
Definitely. Now, I'm just going to rewind my clock a bit. And
sure.
When I don't work for corporations anymore. And when I did, there was a stock option program and things like that I benefited from. However, I put that money away into my mortgage.
Mm-hmm.
What's your advice around that? Where do you put your money? Do you put it into some sort of investment, or is it better to pay off that mortgage? I can't change it now. I've done what I've done. However, going forward,
I think you want to do both, ideally, right?
Yes.
Ideally, that's the thing. But I always think you want to have that nest egg.
Right? And then when I think about, this is why I brought up earlier the whole, like, how were you brought up and what did your parents teach you? And what I'm hearing from you, Jason, is you had the ideal parents that said, save your money. Your father was an accountant. You learned that this is really important, compound interest. And the message is loud and clear for parents that are out there. If you have children, listen to Jason's advice here, folks. Because if I could turn back the hands of time, I'd have done things differently. And for me, again, it was always pay off your mortgage, pay off your mortgage, pay off your mortgage. My dad was also very cheap. He didn't buy much for himself, and he always, and I noticed that pattern in myself as well. Whenever I went to a coffee shop, I wouldn't buy a cappuccino with like caramel on it or whatever, an extra whipped cream. I would just go, you know what, I'll have the black cheap coffee with a bit of sugar, please. And
no sugar.
No, yeah, not anymore. No, I'm off the sugar. And yeah, so it's interesting.
Well, here's the thing about debt. Okay, so debt is an hedge against inflation. So how that works is...
Sorry, debt is a hedge against inflation.
Yes.
I am not a numbers guy. Tell me a bit more about that.
So if you had $1 million of debt,
Yes.
okay, so you have this nice house in Nanuus and it's, worth $2 million, and you say you take out $1 million, you put $1 million down because saved up, or you've sold some other house, or whatever the case is. You buy this bigger, nicer house for $2 million. You have $1 million in debt. Wouldn't that be an ideal situation for a lot of people to have this beautiful house? Yes, $1 million in debt cost you, say, $10,000 a month, or whatever the numbers are. I don't know exactly what those numbers are, but so you're paying your $10,000 a month towards this debt, right? And over time, the house hopefully goes up in value. So over 30 years, historically, since the beginning of houses anywhere in the world, they've gone up over 30, or over a long-term period. Yes, over a short-term period, they may fluctuate. We may see that. But over the long haul, house prices have always gone up at least the rate of inflation. So you've made the value of your house is going up, but the value of your debt in kind of real terms is going down, because as you're the $10,000 a month over time, in 30 years, $10,000 is now, really only $5,000, right? Like, it's the real value of that money is a lot less over time. And you've shrank that debt, where you probably paid it off over 30 years, but the real value, the inflation adjusted value of that debt has gone down, right? Because $1 million today is not what it was 30 years ago, is it?
No.
Right? So the debt has its place, especially when it comes to an asset like a house, or an investment, or whatever the case is. So I'm not saying you shouldn't pay it off, because of course you want to pay off your debts, and you don't want to carry a bunch of huge debts, and $10,000 is a lot of money to be paying towards a debt when you could be spending that money, on other things, right? But
yeah,
it has its place, right, in our financial planning, because it does kind of provide that benefit. And if you were to buy a second property here in Canada, now you rent that place out, so you've got this $1 million house with a $800,000 of debt on it, and you've got this great tenant, maybe not a great tenant, maybe they're a crappy tenant, they wreck the place, but neither here nor there. You've got somebody else paying off that debt, the value of your assets hopefully going up, and the long-term value of that debt's going down, and you're able to write off the interest, right? Because it's a debt towards an income producing asset, right? So you're actually writing that off against the income you're making on the house. So now that becomes really beneficial, right? In terms of a rental property, or whatever that, the case is with that secondary property, is that now becomes an income producing asset with a deductible mortgage on it, right? So
what just came up for me, Jason, when you're sharing that, is that, and this is a mental health podcast, and I'm starting to realize things about myself, which is not pleasant, and I'm okay with that. But we tend to inherit our parents' fears about certain things, and we live into those fears. My dad has been fearful of interest. That was hammered into me at a young age.
Well,
fear interest.
He grew up in an age when his mortgage was 20%.
Yes.
That's if you had 20% interest on $1 million house, that's a killer, right? So, and back then it was $100,000, so it was maybe more manageable, but he had a good reason. It's kind of like when our grandparents who grew up in the 30s, they were the same way, right? They were stashing money in their fridges and keeping every old piece of clothing or whatever the case was, because they might, need it if there's a depression again, right? So, I think the next generation has to learn from previous generations. you can't just rack up debt like crazy. And now we're seeing, it's going to be interesting to see what happens over the next few years, because the Canadian economy has gorged on debt for the last 10, 20 years. We've had all these record low interest rates, and now all of a sudden you're paying 5 or 6% on a mortgage, which is very different than paying 1 or 2%, right? So your dad was definitely not wrong to fear that.
He wasn't,
right?
And I think the learning for me, Jason, is I never spent enough time understanding other perspectives.
Right.
I always feared interest.
Right.
Right. So I never thought about the opportunity of me at a young age taking some extra money there and buying another property and getting a rental income.
Yeah.
Right now, my wife would love us to buy another property, but I still have that fear there around the current interest rates and where our property value is going to go. And I bought in BC 18 years ago, and wow, I'm just amazed at how much the property's gone up. But you always hear also of this, things can only go up so much.
Right.
And they're bound to fall. Where, and I know you won't have the answer to this. If you did,
I'll get my time machine out.
Yeah. Are we at that point? I don't know. And like here where we live, prices are starting to go down a tiny bit. But again, interest rates are going up, so it's no wonder prices are going down. But the question I have about this is, when you look at the rate of return on the market and you look at the rate of return on home prices, from what I understand, they're kind of the same, but then you add that other element that you're saying, yeah, regardless if they're the same, let's say market home sale prices go up 5% per year, blah, 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 you're still making that additional money on your rental.
But
then I own a bit of, like, I inherited my dad's property. We had rental people there, but my brother and I didn't live in Ontario anymore, and we decided let's sell the place because trying to
manage that from afar is impossible.
Rental units, especially my dad was a slumlord.
Yeah.
Like he put linoleum everywhere, and it's just so cheap. And yeah, what is your advice around that? Do you put money into investments? Do you put it into real estate? Is it a balance of the two?
Well,
what are your thoughts on
the
that?
answer. It's
the balance of the
right?
two, yes.
And again, like I said, with real estate, you're getting the leverage, right? Because you're not with the stock market or with investments, unless you're going on margin, which is extremely high risk, you're putting your $200 away every paycheck and you're getting $200, right? Whereas with real estate, you save up your $50,000 and you buy a $500,000 property, right? So now you have a $500,000 asset that, well, if that goes down to 400, that's going to kind of suck because you've got a $450,000 mortgage to pay, right? And interest rates are now at 7%, let's say. Now all of a sudden your payments went from $2,000 to $3,500, right? Now that could be a bad situation for somebody, right? But on the other hand, if the property goes up in value, interest rates, maybe inflation is under control this year, and they start to, the economy is slowing down, so they decide, okay, let's drop rates. Now your payments are starting to ease off, and over time, again, inflation is going to be your friend because you're going to get more rent every year, hopefully, right? You're going to probably get a bigger income. You're going to get a raise every year, and you're going to hopefully get more skills and become a more valued team member, get promotions. So your income's going up over time, right? And now that isn't so expensive to have that payment, right? So
exactly.
So yeah, you definitely need both. I don't think putting your eggs in any one basket is ever a good idea, and buying 20 rental properties isn't necessarily and of course, Sharon and I were lucky enough to have several rental properties, and we kind of divested most of them because we wanted to get rid of all that debt, and we wanted to retire and not have the pain in the butt of rental tenants and dealing with phone calls in the middle of the night, never knowing when you're going to get that call that the roof is blown off and, you know, it's a disaster here or whatever the case is, right? There's always a pain in the butt, right? With owning a rental property. So yeah, in hindsight, if we had bought 100 rental properties, that would have been smart over the last 20 years, right? Or if in hindsight, if you'd kept all your properties of your dad's, well, they went up in value, but there's always the risk that they're going to go the other way and you're going to end up with massive amounts of debt and a decreasing asset and renters with a grow up in them or something like that.
Yeah.
You know, that could be a huge nightmare, right? The beauty of, you know, while you're dealing with your rental property and trying to unplug the toilet, on the other hand, you know, your TFSA's just slowly going up in value, right?
Yes.
It's just continuing to grow and over time becoming something much bigger than it was before, right? So yeah, you absolutely need both, right? And of course you need, you know, a stable place to live if you have a family, right? Ideally you want to probably own a property because then you're not dealing with the problem of having landlords and all of those sorts of things, right?
One key thing that has also resonated with me, and you're talking about this, Jason, and thank you for sharing this, by the way. It's so important, I think, especially for people who are younger, to hear what you're saying. And I love the fact that you're being such an advocate for this, and I acknowledge that. And I think it's so beneficial, and I think the world needs more of this. We don't learn this in school.
No.
We don't learn this in school. We also don't learn about dealing with emotions in school. There's so many things we don't learn in
Absolutely.
school, like real life things. But one of the things in terms of the link between what you're sharing and anxiety and stress and age is by doing what you're doing. Like, you're one of the most laid back people I know. I don't even know if you have stress or even know what that feels like. But
didn't Mark say on the podcast I was practically crying before the West Coast Trails? That was a bit of stress.
The thing is, when you age, your body starts to deteriorate. Your blood pressure starts going up. You have more immune challenges that you're dealing with, arthritis, things like this, and stress actually accelerates those
Absolutely.
and makes things worse. So if you can take a big chunk out of your life of stress, and money is a big piece of it.
Absolutely.
Fran and I are just wondering, like, what are we going to do? When can we retire? And we're
Yeah.
kind of stressing out about it now. I'm trying to manage it, and we have things in order now to get us to where we want to be, hopefully, as long as everything is status quo. But the message I'm hearing is start early. Mm-hmm. You're not going to have that stress.
Yeah.
You're going to be healthier when you're older. You're not going to have these things that come up, which lead me to a question around the fact that you're in a like-minded relationship around money.
Mm-hmm.
And how does... You might not have the answer to this. How does one create that? How did you and Sharon just really combine your values and what you believe about the world and your positions and everything to create this kind of joint venture in retirement and enjoying your life? You just run an amazing trip as well for 3 months. Not all of us can do that.
Yeah.
But you have these similar interests that you go for in many respects. How does one cultivate that in a relationship?
Well, that wasn't easy. And one example of that is, we met and we've been together for 18 years or something, and we got married. I think it was 8 years ago. So we sort of had this period of time where we were both we were dating and sort of hanging out and didn't, we had a great relationship, but we were still independent of each other, and we weren't sure if we were going to get married or whatever the case is. But then when we did get serious and got married, we had this independence financially. We had our own savings, and we were obviously talking about it, and we knew about we obviously had an open and transparent relationship when it came to our finances and how we viewed things and what we had and what we didn't have. But we always did everything separately, right? And so when we got married, that was a big transition to kind of come together. And One of the funny things that happened was, so we were away somewhere, and this fancy new camera was coming out that was $5,000 or something like that. So, I ordered this camera, and it was a pre-order, so it wasn't going to arrive for like 2 months. So I never really thought much about it. Just, oh yeah, Amazon, click, order, great. Now hope, if I don't decide I don't want to get this, I can cancel the order because I'm not going to get it for 2 months or whatever. Sort of forgot about it. And this camera shows up at, we get back from our trip, and this camera shows up at the house, and Sharon's like, well, what's this? Right. And it's like, oh, it's my new camera. Well, how much did that cost? And so that was a huge issue, right? Because, I didn't tell her I had this big purchase. And in the past it was like, well, I just did that because I have my own money and I'll do what I want. Right. But so we had to learn, or I guess I more so had to learn that stuff like that is kind of a discussion you need to have, right? You need to discuss those things and say, okay, yeah, like if I'm going to get this camera because this camera is the next greatest thing since sliced bread, and it's going to it's part of my passion of photography, right? I want to get this new camera. So now we talk about those things, right? And we discuss what we're going to buy, and especially when it comes to big ticket items, right? I mean, if I'm just buying some stupid little thing, we're not necessarily going to have to discuss everything. But when it comes to big ticket purchases like a mountain bike, we're going to talk about that and then make that decision together, right? And
yes.
And again, combining your accounts and all that stuff, that's not easy, right? Like it's a big change in mentality. And again, I think it really just comes down to being open, transparent, honest discussion about things, and kind of learning how to give and take, right? Like anything in a marriage, it's kind of one of those things you have to talk about. And I think that can obviously be a huge stress in people's marriages, right? Especially when you start adding credit card debt and kids and all that stuff. That's a huge debt. So I think it's really just about communicating properly and understanding each other's philosophies and knowing where you can and can't spend money and all those sorts of things. So it's not easy though.
No, it's not. And the whole transparency thing is an interesting one for me. My dad was very frugal with his money, mm-hmm. and my mom was a stay-at-home mom, and she always felt guilty about spending money. So what she was doing was spending it behind my dad's back. What did my wife do? She did the exact same thing with me, Jason. As stuff would show up, she wouldn't tell me because I was instilling fear in her about spending money. So what you were sharing there is it took two parties there to tango. I was instilling fear and she was fearful of spending money.
Absolutely.
And that didn't work out, but there was no integrity in that.
Yeah.
We still have a bit of that going on, because I am trying to be frugal and I'm trying to make sure that we have enough money when we retire. And it's a very difficult conversation to have, Jason.
Yeah.
And I don't know what the answer is there. I think you have to have the conversation because it erodes trust as well. Or I might question what's going on. Here we have this mutual goal that we're trying to get somewhere. And
so there's one, so we have the same thing, like all these packages show up at our house and it's like, oh, what's this? I don't okay, another package here. What, I don't know what's in here. And so that, that kind of becomes like, I think a trust issue or something. But, on the other hand, thinking about that a different way, if you're ordering a $50 item off of Amazon, who cares really? Because you've paid yourself first. You've got your savings already put away, right? This is, again, setting that up at the beginning. You're not worried necessarily about a budget, right? A budget doesn't work. So if you're trying to budget and save money and scrimp on every last thing, that's never going to make you fulfilled and happy. Mm-hmm. And that's going to add stress to the relationship. But if Fran has pocket money that she wants to spend because she's already saved her money for the month, then who cares, right? let her buy stuff. And if it's $500 or $1,000 or $10,000 item, that's a conversation, obviously, right? But if it's little things, then if you've kind of done the basics up front, then it probably doesn't matter anymore.
Yeah,
it's just a matter of where you put all that crap.
Yeah,
right?
that's a really good point, because I don't want to live in a state of neediness, or not a state of neediness. That's what I'm looking for. A state of the have-nots, right? I don't want to be that either. We are in the state of the haves, and I still have this mentality of the have-not.
Yeah,
but that's my stuff.
Somewhat of your issue.
That's
maybe.
My issue, not her issue. And if we have everything set up that we have a plan of attack, and we feel this is going to work, then that's okay. If we have some extra money there, we're going to spend it. But it's also important to look at, if you spend money on this, that means we're not going to be able to spend as much money on this. So what are those things that we want to spend money on? Like one thing we were talking about, we had an amazing travel year. Yes.
Absolutely.
An amazing travel year last year.
We were jealous of you.
Oh, I was jealous of you. And this year, I don't feel like traveling. I just kind of want to stay around and enjoy the community and the friends that we have here. Because it's like, when I think about a vacation, to me, what comes to mind sometimes, it's not really a vacation. There's a lot of stress involved. You're away from your home, and you're not really vacating anything. You are still I'm still anxious. I'm like going from point A to point B and doing all these things. And I'm just like, okay, this year, let's just be here and enjoy what life has to offer. So yeah, it's a good balance, because we told one friend in England that, and she's an amazing sculptress. I don't know if that's what you call them, a sculptor, I guess. And so we told her we want to buy a piece of her work. And we made that commitment to her in London. We said, yeah, you know what? Your work is amazing. We want to buy it. And then, so Fran assumed that we had made a decision on that. And then I see $1,400 missing from our account yesterday. I'm checking my bank statements. I'm like, there's a $1,400 charge on our account.
Whoopsie.
What happened here? Do you know what this is all about? Yeah, Glenn, I thought we made an agreement that we're going to buy the sculpture. I'm like, oh my gosh, okay. But this was just an example. I didn't know that we actually made the decision. Now yes, I support this person. She has amazing art, and I'm glad we're buying a piece of art. But it was just back to that thing. I didn't know she actually made the decision to go ahead, and just the importance of transparency.
Yeah.
However, I'm guilty of it too.
Sure.
Right? I do things, buy it, and then I tell her afterwards. So I just recognize it because I do it. You mentioned that you were going to talk a bit about different things, and I think you covered a lot off so far. But was there something else you wanted to share around best advice if you're young, or even if you're my age, around money and reducing stress? Because you and I had a bit of a preamble conversation before today's episode. Was there anything that's missing for you that we didn't talk about yet today?
I think we covered most of it, but just going back to the tax-free savings account is such a powerful tool that the government in Canada gave us, I think almost 15 years ago, right? They introduced that, and that's been a bit of a political hot potato in some ways, because some people view that as a negative, that, oh, well, I'm never going to be able to afford to put money into my TFSA, so why should rich people be able to use this tool, right? And our government kind of increased that, amount to $10,000, and then when the next government came in, they reduced it back down to $5,000 or whatever. But there's nothing to it, right? Anybody who's once you're 18 years old, you can start contributing the yearly amount, whatever that amount is. Doesn't really matter. Take advantage of that, right? If you can put $200 every 2 weeks, you'll basically max that out, and that can be hugely important. Even if I want you to kind of try to keep that and use that as a nest egg for retirement. But if you had to use that to buy a car, or to the down payment on your house, or whatever the case is, once you've got the money in there, then you're allowed to use that to replace that next year, right? So as long as you replace that money within a year or two, so if you build up, say your $5,000 a year grows to $100,000, you get this great rate of return. You take out the $100,000, that's the room that you now have in your TFSA, right? So now if you put that $100,000 back next year, it's such a great tool that the government has given us, and I don't think people understand how to use it properly. And it's no more difficult than the name of the account, right? Tax-free savings account. So anything you put in there is going to grow tax-free, and it's going to give you kind of that peace of mind, reduce that stress, give you a huge tool to use to your advantage in the future. So it doesn't matter if you're 18 or 65, you should be maxing that thing out every year, and again, hopefully investing it and getting the 8 to 10%. But even now, you can put that in a GIC in there and get 5% interest on it. So if even if you wanted to just play it safe, right, you could get 5% interest right now on a GIC and a TFSA, and that's going to grow at 5% a year. And in a few years, that's going to start to add up to a significant amount of money. So I can't stress that enough, right? That's such an important tool that people don't understand, and they don't take advantage of it. And yes, we should probably be teaching that in school. Every kid, when they graduate from university or from high school, that should be drilled into their head. Start your TFSA. You're 18 now, right? Put your $6,500 in this year, and watch that turn into something huge, right? That's what's going to create wealth for you. So if you're not using that, you're missing out on a huge opportunity.
Yeah, and that also puts less of a burden on the support systems that we have.
Absolutely.
And the taxes that we pay. Jason, I want to thank you for being on the show today. It's been wonderful having you. I've learned so much, and some key lessons that I just want to share back with you that I've really gotten out of today is we all have certain beliefs about money that we grow up with, and it's important to question those beliefs at a younger age versus when like my age now.
It's never too late, though.
It's never too late. The importance of starting investing at a young age, putting as much money as you can away, but also having a balance there. Like you were mentioning, the 10% of your income, put that away right away, and that compounds into, you were mentioning, like if you had 65,000, right? You'd be a billionaire when you're 65. Also, the whole concept, and it's not a concept, the putting money into an EFT versus just
ETF.
ETF. I have to get my. I'm going to have to listen to this
traded fund.
Exchange traded fund. Thank you. And because that kind of balances out in terms of the companies that go in and out over time, like you're mentioning, Bethlehem Steel. The other thing, just around managing your credit card debt.
Yeah.
Making sure that when you have a partner out there, if you do have a partner, that you both buy into how you're going to do things, and having that transparent relationship is really critical. But again, starting at a young age, because otherwise you're going to start stressing out about it at an older age like I'm at right now, and wondering, well, what are we going to do? I know people who are over 65, 70, still working and struggling. And it's sad to see that.
And Glenn, you paid off your mortgage, right? Like, at least you did that, right? The last thing you want to be is 70 years old and have a huge mortgage on your house or something like that, right? With little to show for your savings. So, paying that off, that's a huge thing that you achieved and accomplished. So celebrate that too.
Oh, thank you. I'll pat myself on the back.
Absolutely.
And it feels like sometimes looking at our credit card bills, we still have a mortgage payment going through. That's a whole other topic of discussion. And the last thing is that I really gotten out of just chatting with you, Jason, is not to take things as serious as we may, and to give back to yourself. As long as you have a plan in place, it's okay to spend money. That's what it's there for. Because I find that many people out there, they save. They might spend money on their kids, and I have a child, and Fran has a child, and we had to do that when we were younger. And they don't focus on themselves, and we all have a certain time we're going to die. It's bound to happen. Science has said we are going to die. And to spend money on yourself so you can enjoy your life as well.
Absolutely.
Jason, thanks for being on the show. And everybody, thanks for listening.
Thank you, Glenn.
You're welcome. Thank you.